For centuries, Europe was basically one enormous game of risk. Kings invaded their neighbors, emperors erased borders, and entire countries disappeared before anyone had time to update the map. But right in the center of all that chaos sat one small country that refused to go away: Switzerland. The Habsburgs tried to control it. Medieval knights marched into it. Napoleon surrounded it. Hitler drew up plans for it. And yet Switzerland survived. Most people will tell you the answer is simple: mountains. But that explanation has one very large problem. Because Switzerland was conquered. And the story of how it came back reveals a far stranger defense system than any fortress. Switzerland looks as if someone dropped a natural fortress directly between France, Germany, Austria, and Italy. The Alps cut across the south and center. Narrow valleys funnel movement into predictable routes. Mountain passes can be blocked. Roads can disappear under snow. And even today, crossing the country means negotiating tunnels, steep grades, and terrain that seems designed by a military engineer with trust issues. But mountains are not magical force fields. Rome controlled this region. Armies crossed the Alps long before Switzerland existed. Hannibal famously dragged an army, and elephants, through alpine terrain more than 1,000 years before the Swiss Confederacy was born. If mountains alone made invasion impossible, half of Europe would have been unconquerable. Switzerland's real advantage was that the terrain did not fight by itself. The people living there learned how to turn geography into a weapon. In the late Middle Ages, the region was not a single modern country. It was a patchwork of valleys, towns, nobles, monasteries, and rival claims. Powerful families, especially the Habsburgs, wanted greater control over crucial alpine routes. The communities of Uri, Schwyz, and Unterwalden responded with alliances for mutual defense. Later generations would treat the Federal Charter of 1291 as a founding document, but Switzerland did not appear in one heroic afternoon. It formed slowly, through agreements, arguments, and a shared dislike of being ordered around by outsiders. Then came the battles that created the legend. At Morgarten in 1315, forces from the young confederation defeated a Habsburg army in constricted terrain. The details were polished by centuries of patriotic storytelling, but the strategic lesson was real. Heavy cavalry loses much of its advantage when it cannot maneuver. The Swiss did not need to look impressive. They needed the enemy to enter the wrong place at the wrong time. At Sempach in 1386, the Confederates again defeated Habsburg forces. Over time, Swiss infantry developed a terrifying reputation. Tight formations of men carrying long pikes could meet cavalry head-on. Halberds gave them reach and brutal close-range power. Discipline mattered more than noble titles. A mounted aristocrat who had trained his entire life could discover, in a few seconds, that a wall of coordinated farmers was not interested in respecting the social order. By the 15th century, the Swiss were no longer merely surviving attacks. They were becoming one of Europe's most feared military forces. Their greatest advertisement came during the Burgundian Wars. Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, had wealth, artillery, armored cavalry, and an ambition to build a powerful state between France and the Holy Roman Empire. On paper, he looked like the future. Then he ran into the Swiss. At Grandson in 1476, Charles lost the field and an astonishingly rich camp. A few months later at Morad, his army was shattered again. In 1477, Charles was killed at Nancy. Burgundy's dream collapsed, and the Swiss reputation exploded across Europe. Foreign rulers began hiring Swiss soldiers as mercenaries because they were disciplined, aggressive, and very good at turning a battlefield into an employment opportunity. This created a strange paradox. Switzerland's military reputation protected it, but Swiss fighters were everywhere outside Switzerland, fighting other people's wars for money. The country that would later become famous for neutrality first became famous for exporting violence. The answer arrived at Marignano in 1515. Swiss forces confronted the army of Francis I of France near Milan. The battle was long, chaotic, and devastating. French artillery and cavalry, reinforced by Venetian troops, helped break the Swiss assault. Marignano ended the image of Swiss invincibility. But the defeat may have protected Switzerland in the long run. The Confederates reduced their appetite for expansion. They continued to supply mercenaries, but the state itself gradually stepped back from major power competition. This was not yet the fully developed permanent neutrality recognized centuries later. It was something more practical. Switzerland had learned that being terrifying enough to deter neighbors was useful. but trying to become an empire was expensive, divisive, and dangerous. That shift matters because weak countries are often conquered when they become useful prizes or dangerous threats. Switzerland worked to become neither. It sat on important routes, but conquering it promised difficult terrain, stubborn resistance, and no simple political jackpot. It was valuable enough to trade with, yet increasingly inconvenient to occupy. There was another obstacle that invaders faced. Switzerland was not organized like a normal centralized kingdom. The old confederation was a network of cantons with different interests, languages, religions, and political systems. That made Switzerland frustrating to govern from within, but also difficult to decapitate from outside. Capture one capital? There was no single royal court that controlled everything. Arrest one king? There was no king. Force one government to surrender? Other cantons might disagree, simply because disagreeing was practically a national tradition. Decentralization can create weakness. It can slow decisions and produce internal conflict. Switzerland would suffer religious civil wars after the Reformation, and the cantons were not always united. But the same structure made permanent foreign control complicated. Local communities maintained their own institutions and identities. An occupier could win a battle without automatically winning the country. In 1798, armies of revolutionary France invaded the Swiss Confederacy. The old system was divided, politically outdated, and unable to organize a unified defense. Some regions resisted fiercely, but French forces prevailed. The Helvetic Republic was imposed as a centralized state allied to France. So yes, Switzerland was conquered. The myth ends here, at least if the myth is that no foreign army ever defeated it. But occupying Switzerland was easier than rebuilding it in France's image. The centralized republic clashed with local traditions. Political factions fought. Revolts broke out. French troops were needed to hold the new order together. Napoleon eventually replaced the system with the Act of Mediation in 1803, restoring substantial power to the cantons. France had demonstrated the difference between invasion and durable control. An army can cross a border, defeat defenders, and declare victory. But conquest is not finished until the conquered society accepts, or can no longer resist, the new system. In Switzerland, the invader inherited mountains, local loyalties, political fragmentation, and a population accustomed to self-rule. France could occupy the territory. Transforming it permanently was another matter. After Napoleon's defeat, Europe's major powers redesigned the continent at the Congress of Vienna. In 1815, Swiss neutrality was internationally recognized. This was not an act of charity. A neutral Switzerland served the interests of its neighbors. France did not want Austria dominating the Alpine center. Austria did not want France controlling it. Other powers preferred a buffer that did not belong to either side. Switzerland's survival became useful to the European balance of power. This may be the most underrated part of the answer. Countries survive not only because of what they can destroy, but because of the arrangements other countries prefer. Once neutrality became part of the European order, invading Switzerland meant more than defeating the Swiss. It risked alarming every rival power that benefited from the buffer. Switzerland had turned its independence into a product that other states wanted to preserve. Neutrality did not mean Switzerland stopped preparing for war. Its model became armed neutrality. Stay out of other states' conflicts, but maintain the capacity to defend the country. Military service and reserve structures placed a large share of trained manpower within civilian society. Defensive planning focused on mobilization, infrastructure, and the terrain. Bridges and tunnels could be denied to an attacker. Mountain positions and fortifications turned key approaches into potential traps. The message was not, "We will defeat every possible invader." It was, "Whatever you think this will cost, increase the estimate." This is classic deterrence. A smaller country does not need to be stronger than a great power in every category. It needs enough capability, preparation, and uncertainty to make aggression less attractive than the alternatives. Switzerland could not guarantee that it would never lose. It could guarantee that victory would be slow, disruptive, and expensive. By 1940, Nazi Germany had overrun much of Western Europe. France had fallen. Axis-controlled territory surrounded Switzerland on nearly every side. German planners examined an invasion under plans commonly associated with the name Operation Tannenbaum. Switzerland was not protected by a magical promise. It mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops and prepared for attack. Swiss commander Henri Guesson developed the National Redoubt strategy. Rather than attempt to defend every inch of the lowlands indefinitely, core forces could withdraw toward fortified alpine regions and control crucial north-south routes. The idea was grim. An invader might seize cities and farmland, but the army would continue fighting from the mountains while denying easy use of strategic infrastructure. This was not a plan for a clean victory. It was a plan to make occupation painful and strategically disappointing. But military deterrence was only one part of the story. Germany also had economic and logistical reasons not to invade immediately. Switzerland traded with both sides under extreme pressure, handled financial transactions, and sat across useful transport routes. Historians continue to debate the relative importance of military resistance, geography, economics, diplomacy, and German priorities. The safest conclusion is not that one clever trick saved Switzerland. It is that invasion offered costs, risks, and distractions at a time when Hitler already had larger wars to fight. Switzerland's wartime record was also morally complicated. The country sheltered many refugees but turned others away. Swiss banks and companies conducted business connected to Nazi Germany, and these actions later faced major investigation and criticism. Neutrality kept Switzerland outside the battlefield. It did not keep Switzerland outside history or outside responsibility. By now, the pattern becomes clear. Switzerland survived because several defenses reinforced one another. Geography created choke points. Local military traditions created credible resistance. Decentralized institutions made political takeover harder. Neutrality reduced the number of enemies Switzerland created. Diplomacy convinced larger powers that an independent buffer was useful. Economic connections made disruption costly. And constant preparation ensured that neutrality did not look like helplessness. Remove any one layer, and the country becomes more vulnerable. Mountains without soldiers can be crossed. Soldiers without diplomacy can be overwhelmed. Neutrality without defense can be ignored. Trade without independence can become dependency. Switzerland's real achievement was not inventing one perfect shield. It built a system in which every potential conqueror encountered a different reason to reconsider. Of course, no country is literally unconquerable. Modern air power, missiles, cyber attacks, and economic pressure do not care about medieval pike formations. Switzerland is surrounded today not by hostile empires, but mostly by friendly European states. Its security environment is completely different, yet the old logic remains relevant. National survival depends on making aggression difficult, politically costly, and strategically pointless. That is why the question, "Why could nobody conquer Switzerland?" is slightly wrong. Rome controlled the region. Revolutionary France invaded and occupied it. The Swiss lost battles, suffered internal wars, and compromised under pressure. Switzerland was never protected by destiny. Its success came from adapting after failure, turning military defeat into restraint, political fragmentation into resilience, dangerous geography into deterrence, and great power rivalry into internationally recognized neutrality. Switzerland did not survive because nobody was strong enough to enter. It survived because entering was only the beginning. After the march through the pass came the pikes. After the battle came the cantons. After the occupation came the revolt. After the diplomatic victory came the problem of every other power watching. Conquering Switzerland was possible. Making the conquest worth it was the part almost nobody solved. And that may be Switzerland's most powerful lesson. The best defense is not always a wall that cannot be broken. Sometimes it is a country designed so that breaking the wall creates more problems than it solves.